through mutual friends. We hung out this year at DEF CON. He spoke at Black Hat. He has a unique experience, and he's trying to spread knowledge and awareness, I guess, as to some of the policies and things that have actually happened to him. He has joined us all the way from Atlanta, Georgia. So without any further ado, we'll go with Mike Daugherty. Here you are, Mike.
Thank you very much. When I speak to technology and medical people, I like to keep the slides fast and snappy. So we actually have like 100 slides, but I'll go through because and I don't, this is, if I could title this the way I wanted to, I'd call it, "This is how they do it." And one thing I've learned, I've been in medicine for 30 years. I'm from Detroit, Michigan.
Yeah, Detroit.
Go Blue, Michigan alone. Sorry, we're playing Maryland now, and that's how much I think John Johnson's such an awesome guy, because I'm missing this right here. And anyway, I want to kind of tear through my story to get to what the bigger picture is, because that's the most important thing. We have, especially with tying in the morning, we've seen such tragedies. My tragedy is kind of a small tragedy compared to what really is going on in the world. But it's more important to the shock that I found about how the government operates in the final analysis. How is this solving any problems? And in my opinion, clearly is that it's not. It's actually enabling and creating more. And so I learned when I wanted to be effective to get people to message, lighting yourself on fire saying I'm the victim is pretty ineffective, except to be 15 minutes of roadkill, and I don't want to be 15 minutes of roadkill. So I learned through UCLA people in the neuroscience department about story, and the most important thing about story is that it really neutralizes the opposition in the brain. So when you speak in story versus just at you, and at you gives us 17 minutes of your attention, it tends to put you in the shoes of the communicator, and you go along that journey together. And as Americans, that's what happens. So my book is written like a novel. And I will get into the specifics of that later through the story of exactly how they do it. And what you'll see is we'll leave through this, and you'll see how the bigger picture of doing it has happened. So this is about, in a micro vision of the Federal Trade Commission and how they, oh, right there, okay, thanks. And the fact is, I just got back from Sydney, Australia, by the way, and this slide is really trying to tell everyone that this is a world problem. The interesting thing about this internet is that all our barriers are really disappearing. And when I spoke in Sydney, it was 2 days after the Ashley Madison breach. And so what I just said to the crowd is, what are you gonna do, sue the server in Toronto? What are you gonna do? And of course, no one in the room, of course, anything to do with Ashley Madison, I knew. That's still the point. Now, how many people here are in a corporate setting? Academia? Students in academia? Government? Okay, great. So you'll see, now, what you see from this morning is, you notice this kind of ties everything. This is like, this is porous, and all of these cybersecurity issues just impact all of us, and it's like nothing we've ever seen before, and we've had so many benefits of it the past 15, 20 years, and now what we're seeing is the rearview mirror. Holy cow, we forgot about security, and so we're playing mad catch-up. So, and like we said earlier, the biggest weakness is the human, and that's your weakest link. And I just saw a statistic that 71% of all these breaches are in small organizations. And one thing that I've noticed about being a small businessman at LabMD with 40 employees that are highly intelligent and competent, because we diagnose cancer, is that we're very much dismissed by the privacy community, the cybersecurity community, academia, and government, because we're not big, we're not multinational, we're not all over the place. And it's ironic because they're in an echo chamber of their own in solving this, and they're disregarding the main source of where it is. Small does not mean weak or insignificant. And until the people that have power to do this understand that, you're still going to have leaks going on, and they're going to be spinning and spinning. So, and one of the big things the government has done that I've learned is that villainy wears many masks, none more dangerous than the mask of virtue. And the Federal Trade Commission's job is to protect consumers. The EPA is to keep our water clean. The IRS to make sure we pay our taxes on time. And isn't it wonderful? And that just puts a bag over your head of what's been going on. And what I want to focus on is accountability instead of marketing labels on these agencies. So we hope to shatter your assumptions about the knowledge of those who are driving the ship. but not scared you any more than we scared this morning. We've had plenty of that, sorry. It'll be time for lunch after this. And so I see myself, I always joke, I'm on the Titanic saying, iceberg, iceberg, and everybody wants me to shut up. So they get back to just dancing. And so it's important when you communicate to not go too into conspiracy, because you have to give people, and I was one of them. I only became aware when the tree fell down on me, folks. I was buried in medicine, making great money, doing wonderful work, having the best time of my life, and the tree fell down on me. And before the tree fell down on me, I would also kind of go like, hey, don't ruin my buzz. Life is good here. I don't want to know about this. And so you have to be more gentle when you wake people up. You can't. So hopefully I'm going to be more gentle. All right, so now it's time for, oops, we're going to go back to this. I'm going to play this video just to pick you guys up on real quick on who my company was and what happened to get over the hump of my story and get to the bigger macro picture. We're about 20 employees. We diagnosed. Let's do this. Yeah, we'll do this. Okay, sorry. We're about 20 employees. We diagnose cancer for urologists all around the country. Tissue comes in, we process it, our physicians on staff diagnose it. Things are going quite well. Out of the blue, the phone rang.
Stand by. No.
How many tech guys does it take?
I'm a medicine guy. Somebody got a browser cache or just for you Firefox.
Minimize the screen.
Windows.
It's the students are all watching Netflix this morning, so I'm sorry.
Oh, God.
Yeah.
So that you don't judge us. Right. It's really hard to troubleshoot. It's hard to troubleshoot technology. Never happened to Defcon. Taxi driver. You realize lower, click. All right.
I was doing it in my head too, so.
We're about 20 employees. We diagnose cancer for urologists all around the country. Tissue comes in, we process it, our physicians on staff diagnose it. Things are going quite well.
These are really high points.
Out of the blue, the phone rings. It's a gentleman from a company in Pennsylvania called Tyversa. We had no idea who that was. His name was Robert Bobick. He said he was the CEO, and that he had found one of our files on a peer-to-peer network. We wanted to know how we got it. And I didn't trust this at all. So I wanted to make sure that he only communicated with us in writing so we could have some sort of a paper trail. He emailed the file, and it was a billing file from our billing department, 9,000 patients in there with their patient name, date of birth, social security number, insurance information, everything we needed to know to file insurance. We ran up the billing department and we found the workstation because it was a report that was clearly off the manager's workstation, and we found software there, LimeWire. That was terrifying. She used it to listen to music. The employee had no idea she was making any type of patient information vulnerable. She was violating policy by listening to music. And in that folder were 800 and some odd music files and this report. And about 38 patient files, but they were all redacted out, except for this one with 9,000 and one other with one patient. We were just amazed how this could happen, and it was something seemed amiss. So we started asking questions. The first logical question is, where'd you get it? And then how'd you get it? And then what's the IP address? And as soon as we got to the IP address, there was a little bit of a shakiness in the response. And they said, well, we're going to have to hire them via a services agreement. He would have to get us a bid and see if it's possible. This is a red flag. We called our lawyers and immediately wanted to make sure the patients were fine. The first thing was, let's close down any vulnerabilities that are there, if they're there, and look to see if we can find the file anywhere and see if it's spread anywhere. We are aghast at what's going on. We want to know who has got this. It's not outside in cyberspace. We don't find it anywhere. We turn our attention back to Mr. Balbeck. In his email communications, he's seductively trying to act like the nice guy and warning us that the spread could continue the longer we waited to hire them to look for it. In the meantime, we see no evidence that it's out there. We don't know who he is, and he won't tell us anything unless we pay him. So we told him to go away and only call our lawyers, which he did in late 2008. His lawyer contacted our lawyers and said, we're going to turn this over to the Federal Trade Commission. We found that interesting and said, fine, go ahead, turn it over to the government. A year and a half later, we got a call from the FTC. It was just this creepy feeling like we were being watched. Be sure to subscribe to my social media outlets at LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. Also follow my blog at thedevilinsidethebeltway.com. So that I want people to actually see the medical facility and know what we're doing diagnosing cancer and get that insight. All right, now, 2009 comes and all we're doing is trying to get back to normal, and we just keep looking, we can't find it. And every time we starts to fade away, we're looking to find out what's out there. You're trying to prove something that you don't think has happened. There's no guidelines, you're not supposed, what are you supposed to tell patients if you notify them? Well, we didn't have any legal obligation to do at the time, and most of our patients are elderly. So a guy called, he says he has it, he's got it, we don't know how, he won't tell us. What are you supposed to do? So, in 2010, we get a letter from the FTC, and right after that, they put out a press release that says, widespread data breaches uncovered by FTC probe. FTC warns of improper release of sensitive consumer data and peer-to-peer file sharing networks. Here's the key thing. They've notified almost 100 organizations about personal information. All this is LimeWire, peer-to-peer. Everyone knows what LimeWire is, probably. Let's skip over that with this crowd. Now, I'm trying to figure out what the heck's going on, because the FTC's calling me. And they're enforcing this on the FTC Section 5 Act, which I'll talk about in a second. And what I'm learning is, I learned that my lawyers say that there doesn't have to be any proven problem, there doesn't have to be any proven breach, there doesn't have to be any, they can make up the rules about what you've done wrong as they go along. And I have to, while I'm an extroverted sort of, entrepreneur, ultimately I'm a science guy, and I want to put together the pieces as to why, and it's not fitting, no matter what I do, so I have to figure out how this happened. And so what I tell audiences, look, we're taught in school that we have the executive branch, the judicial branch, and we have the legislative branch, which the founding fathers split in two, because it's supposed to be very difficult to regulate and to bring in legislature. So they snapped the legislative body in two, just make that mountain steeper, which is also why it's so hard to solve mistakes they make. But 100 years ago, Congress created what we consider the fourth branch of government, which is the government agency, and an administrative process. And all our freedoms and separation of powers are here, so that they can't oppress us and they can't do things. Now, I think the Congress of 100 years ago didn't understand what they were creating, what's morphed into. So even today, as I've spent so much time in Congress now, even congressmen and their staff don't understand this. There is so little communication between the government, which we really learned from 9/11, and don't think they've fixed that since 9/11. And what happens is, when this administrative process here is where they have their own policing, they self-police, they have their own courts, they have their administrative process, and Congress has said you can't fight to the judicial system until you're through it. And that turns into a fist. So the separation of powers happens, and this is why you see things like the FCC making rules and refusing to tell Congress what's in them until they pass them. And the tail starts wagging the dog. Now, this creates a petri dish for corruption, because these are not Democrats or Republicans, they're bureaucrats. And they come, typically now, which was different than 100 years ago, they come straight out of law school, and they're regulating medicine and technology without knowledge. So it's bull in the china shop, they don't know what they're smashing, but they have a load of power. And bureaucrats have scam experience in worlds they regulate, and the FTC lawyers with us are more concerned with cooperation than truth. So right off the bat, we have hired the lawyers, spend a ton of money. The second you call the lawyers, tick, 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 tick. And so let's go through what the FTC is, because I'm trying to wrap my head around this. So the FTC's official agenda is to protect the consumer from unfairness and deception. An act or practice is unfair, and let me tell you something, this next 3 points are where billions of dollars are spent because of this. Causes or is likely to cause substantial injury to consumers. Cannot be reasonably avoided by consumers and is not outweighed by countervailing benefits to consumers or to competition. Now, because the way Congress has created the agencies, who makes the decision on what is likely to cause? What is substantial? What is reasonably avoided? What is a countervailing benefit? They decide. So you have judge, jury, prosecutor deciding. And you've got this perfect setup where the only way to get through it is crawl through millions of dollars in several years. The typical target is corporations. So you've got law firm departments that just sign the check and go. And this all used to be fine until we start getting to cybersecurity and medicine. Now that the government has reached into those levels, you've just got these people that don't know what they're doing, but you have corporations that just roll and leave because they've got the money to sign away. And so the noose tightens. And we're at this tipping point where their effectiveness in fixing the problems of technology and cyber warfare and medicine are obviously not working. Now, one of the commissioners who just resigned a month ago was only in there for 2 years, and what he said was, he put this talk out, this article, and there's a problem with Section 5. When they sue you, does everyone follow me so far? We're okay, no fleshing questions, okay. So when they go after you and they investigate you, and most people roll over, and they decide to take an administrative process, you're in their court. So I'm in administrative court right now, and the judge is at ftc.gov. And if they lose, the judge rules against the FTC in the last 30 years, 20 years, 100% of the time they rule with staff, which means if the judge says, staff, you're wrong, the commissioners can overturn it just by a vote. And every single time they have. And half the time when they go to appeal, the FTC loses. So there is this gigantic bias that makes every law firm tell their client, the con is on, the system's rigged, write the check, and move on. The problem is, when you do that to a medical facility that's diagnosing cancer, you're just ruining the reputation. And right now, it's not as bad as it was 4 years ago, but keep in mind, this is 2008 to 2010. Try to remember, 9,000 patients now, that's like, you mean not 90 million? In 2015 alone, we've had 91.3 million healthcare records breached in the United States. And we have 9,000 that we later proved never got out, and they're freaking out. And so this is the type of behavior is so incredible, the power is so centralized that you have to, everyone just rolls. And so then you have the gaslighting, because then they're still hitting, and I've become a sort of a PhD in all this stuff now, because it so happened to me, but they hit Congress, they hit the media, they hit every law school, and they say, we're doing these wonderful things, we're saving all this stuff, we've got broad power, Congress has given us broad power. When on the inside they want you to be afraid. I was in a unique situation. I'm not judging all these lawyers from these other companies that just rolled and settled. But the problem was that I was in a lose-lose because I ran a medical facility. So just acknowledging that we had this potential maybe would make every physician freak out. All you have to do is doubt. And you've got a system of people that are moving 100 miles an hour in medicine. They don't need any more scoops on their ice cream cone. So what the government wants you to do, and they act like this is nothing, is they want you to sign a consent decree. This is a really key negotiative piece to understand. And this isn't just the FTC. A consent decree is nothing more than a contract. And a contract agreement can be with somebody you're selling a car to or the government. This is just a fancy name for you sign an agreement that says, we'll admit no wrongdoing, and we will allow you to biannually audit us at our expense with an outside consulting firm for 20 years. What they don't tell you is that then they're going to put out a press release that makes everyone think you're cold flat busted. Come on, folks. If it doesn't fit in a tweet, we don't pay attention. So everyone's going to think my company, LabMD, has bad data security practices. And I have a really small company that kicks the tail of multi-billion-dollar labs. And so they're going to run around putting fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And so we were in this unique situation that we were dead no matter what. We were in a lose-lose. If I signed the consent decree, it was as bad as if I didn't. So I really had nothing to lose. So I'm not a big, I mean, I am a big principle guy, but I had a very unique decision to make. And so I knew that signing the consent decree would not be okay, because everyone's going to use that against me. Now, I will tell you that as background, I'm from Detroit. Both my parents were police officers when they met in Detroit, and so my whole life has been judges and police officers and lawyers. So I think I had an advanced, jaded opinion of the federal investigators, since my dad hates federal investigators. So this is nothing more than a shakedown. This is nothing more than just go along to get along. It's going to be terrible. That's what your own lawyers are going to say. Forget justice. Forget due process. Come on, grow up. But this is all secret law. Because what they were telling us, what I was aghast at, is they don't have to have rules or standards or regulations. Section 5 can be that broad. And in medicine, this is unbelievable, because in medicine, we work collaboratively. We're regulated like crazy. We're inspected top to bottom. Every manual, everything out, every machine, every test is documented back into hard drives and applications. And we're just amazed that they're acting so punitively and making it as they go along, because their big excuse in the government is that, well, cybersecurity is happening so fast, if we write a standard or a rule, it'll be outdated tomorrow, and then we'll never be able to get the bad guys. And you guys want us to get the bad guys, don't you? And from my experience in medicine, that's a big crock, because there's nothing more that changes faster than medicine, and we do not regulate punitively. But I had a decision to do if I should fight or flight. So the common burden is what I talked about earlier. These regulators aiming in the wrong direction. And their collaborative versus punitive regulatory practices. And the fact that they just want you to go along to get along. And if you don't, they're going to bury you in procedures and data. And they're nuns with guns. And they're doing the Lord's work. And if the Lord doesn't work, they've got other means. But they try to keep friendly. And the whole thing you always get from your lawyers, which drives me nuts, is don't get them mad. Don't get them mad. I was always like, why? Why not get them mad? This is the most adversarial thing I've seen in my life. What are they going to do? That they're already planning on doing. Because when the government knocks on your door, folks, they think you're busted already. They don't show up unless they've done a ton of homework already. The beginning of the process with the government is not high when we talk to you. That's the end. So I started doing my own homework, because this just stinks to me. My own lawyers are like conspiracy theorists. I'm like, no, I'm not. And I find out that Homeland Security has written a $24.5 million grant to Dartmouth to research cybersecurity breaches and leaks within the government setting and healthcare. And Dartmouth hires, remember Bobick up there in that video? You know where he was doing? That was his congressional testimony. Bobick is working with Dartmouth. And Bobick has put out a press release that they're working with Dartmouth, and through this grant, they're monitoring 4.5 million workstations worldwide. And just for this study alone, they've downloaded 14 million files. None of them music, military, tax returns, medical, financial. And I'm thinking, I've cracked the code. They're all in this together. And I see all this congressional testimony from 2007 and 2009 in front of House Oversight and the Commerce Department, the Commerce Committee, and there's Bobick sitting there with, who's on an advisory board? General Wesley Clark, Howard Schmidt. We've got the FTC sitting there. And I'm like, well, there's no conspiracy here. I got it right here in black and white, under oath. This is great, I cracked the case. And they're like, and these people are in bed together, and they don't want anyone to know. And I call my lawyers, and they're like, doesn't matter. All that matters is you had an employee put LimeWire on a workstation with federal authorization, and even if nothing got out, they can say what they want because they can make it up as they go along. So I can't get an answer of what we do wrong or what we do right from the government that's coming at me, sideswiping the company, by the way. And so I called Ben Wright at Sands. He's the only guy I could find that actually criticized the Federal Trade Commission and the way they're dealing with cybersecurity regulation. And I paid to have him come in. He's a technology lawyer out of Texas. He went to Georgetown Law. He looks through everything and basically saying, you know, you're a victim of a crime. And there's no breach here. And the reason there's no breach here is because it never got out. It got out to a government agency. It's fully under control. The legal definition of a breach is that it's out of control. It's not out of control, there's no breach. And sure enough, we start looking at the FTC's communications, and that first, remember that press release? 100 companies, all those breaches? Suddenly that word breach just disappears. But the thing is, the public knows enough just to be dangerous. And so even when you don't say breach, that's the layman's term. And we're small business. And I said it earlier, 71% of these things are happening from small businesses and we're totally being ignored. And the issue isn't that we're small, the issue is, okay, well, how are you going to solve the problem if you don't include where it's happening? And then the FTC loves to let you know through their discussions that, I mean, there's these little flashbulb moments that they say things and it's like they're having a good time. And they say, you know, we can reopen our investigation anytime. We can always come back to it. And you have the sense that you'll be watched forever. And I'm not afraid of these people, which really pissed them off. But I knew if I was going to take them on that you have the long slog up Justice Mountain. And the long slog up Justice Mountain is the #1 negotiative tool of a government agency. It's like, yeah, you're innocent. But this isn't a criminal investigation, so you don't have the right you think you have, and we'll just drain you dry. And that's what your lawyers are telling you on your side. So so they sue us. I'm sorry, they didn't sue us. They start threatening us. And what I put up here in words, I like to use the court's words because I figure if I say it, it's doubted, but the judge says it's true. And they said we wouldn't sign the consent decree, which was a humorous story in and of itself because I'm telling you, these people never heard the word no. And they were so enamored that this feisty little boy from Atlanta that owns a small company would have the nerve to take us on. I mean, they were humored by it. But they said, we're going to sue you tomorrow, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, and they didn't do it. Next thing you know, we're in court because they're filing investigative demands off me and my vice president. We start fighting it, we end up at the 11th Circuit, saying, do they have the right to come in? And the judge starts saying right off the bat, no one's litigated your authority in this area to do so, but you've done a lot of it. That's because all these companies are rolling over. And the noose is tightening around everyone's neck. And I'll explain why later. So, and the FTC thinks that their law of notification due process is speaking on panels and workshops and publishing guidance on their website. They think that's law. But the judge, as much as he beat them up in court, he says he has to enforce us to sit down and be interviewed again. Now, keep in mind, this is after 2 years of being investigated over and over. We spent a couple $100,000. We've installed WebSense, which didn't exist for companies under 250. They had to customize a package. We had to spend all this money not knowing what to do, so we went as far up as we could. Because what are you going to do when they want to tell you what to do? You just overshoot as much as you can overshoot. And sure enough, the judge huffs and puffs, but says, I can't do anything. Why can't I do anything? Because Congress makes the rules, and this is Congress's rules. And what this means, folks, is that the government can come in any reason, any way, anyhow. So I decided I've got to tell everybody. So, and I want to actually kind of provoke those idiots. And so I read a book. and I can't tell you how it worked better than I could have ever imagined. Because my message is that this is persecution through process. And it's such a tipping point that we're paying the price, unlike maybe 20 years ago. That these are such severe attacks on our liberty and our commerce. Because that's what these cybersecurity breaches are. That's what China's doing in Russia. They're sucking in our military so they get some commerce. And yet you have these bureaucrats who are just in a power play so they can rule the internet. So the litigation strategy of the FTC when they do persecution through process is they can choose to just go option one, straight to federal court, which, is anyone familiar with the Wyndham case? That's been, I don't know if but there's two major cybersecurity cases in the United States right now. My case, LabMD versus FTC, and Wyndham. Wyndham's this huge company. They had a load of patients lost. It's bad media. They have $10 million in damages. They go straight to federal court. When they don't have such a strong case, or they just want to drain you dry, they go here. And the thing is, they get to make their own rules. It's not like federal court. Congress says you have your own courts. You get to make your own rules. And Congress has to approve them. And let me tell you about Congress approving. Oh yeah. I mean, I've been there now to know that's not what our assumptions are. They're too busy. They're spread too thin. There's too much noise. So they drain you dry financially. They make their own rules. They allow hearsay. The attorneys are privileged. So all their investigators are attorneys. So when you ask what you did wrong or what happened in the investigation, like you would when a trial really happened, they don't have to tell you. It's so bizarre, even though lawyers that have experience in this court, in this type of litigation, just scratch their head and they can't believe it. They win 100% of the time, as you saw. They assassinate your reputation because they say they don't participate in media commentary, but they do when they file the case. And that's why they're so stinging when they file them. Psychological warfare, because I own the company. I'm going to go down with the ship. If you work for me and you see this is going on, when I say I didn't do it, who believes that? The press is cooperative because we have to save the world. If the government's not saving the world, what good is government? And we have a press right now. I don't attack the press directly except to say there's no money in newspapers anymore for investigative journalism. There just isn't. There are no investigative journalisms at local newspaper anymore. Very rare. So they're aggregators of what comes out of DC in a bottleneck. And those people are either afraid to tick off people with power or they're in bed with them. So it's very hard. And so this all damages operations. So that's a long version of my employees were getting terrified. And I learned then, what's the FTC really doing here? Because Congress hasn't made law. And the FTC doesn't want to go to Congress. They don't want to pay for the process. These agencies are now 100 years old, and they are their own governments on their own. And they know you get the consent decree, you build precedent by having a glossary of them, you avoid the courts because everyone rolls over, you mislead and stonewall Congress, and then you play hero to the press, and the common law becomes the law. Yet, the 50 biggest data breaches in healthcare, not one resulting in FTC action. Why is that? Because lambs are easy to slaughter, big companies are not. So, we're tiny, and we don't really matter. We are necessary, unfortunate, what's that word? Not carnage. Collateral damage. So then they sue us. Now what happens then is Tyversus sues us for defamation because the book came out 3 weeks after I got sued. God knows it's going to get sued. That's a coincidence. So we get sued by the FTC. Notice, do we see the word breach? Alleges exposure and vulnerability. Because you know there's not a computer in the country or the world that doesn't have a vulnerability or a risk of exposure. What you get down to is the biggest orgy of wordsmithing you've ever seen in your life. Where upside down is right side up, and these people say stuff with a straight face, and you sit there and shake your head. And then their PR machine hits again, and this is bullying. And I mean, it's just entertaining how cocky they are. I mean, these people really think they're saving the world. But I'm like, based on what? They are just in that bellwether echo chamber of DC. They straight out of law school, right into the agency. They're there for 20 years and what's going on. And they use they justify all this behavior because they're utterly convinced they're saving the world. They know it. And there's no shortage of people who think you're guilty because the government accuses you. And so I was knowing this, and I was spending about 8 months while I was writing the book in DC. And there's a couple rules when you're calling Congress. The number one rule is never act like you're a victim or ask them for help or to save you, because that's the fastest way to get injuries is they run the other way. They just don't. So I didn't ask, I said, I want you to let you know how the agency's going. I started a conversation. I didn't put anyone on the spot. I didn't make anyone uncomfortable. I didn't act like I was in a panic. Even though I was in a panic and I was on fire and everyone was like, but it's not gonna work, I wanted to work. Well, Cause of Action, I met through that experience, is a nonprofit law firm that does pro bono work on government malfeasance. So where they filed the lawsuit, put the press release out. I was in Orlando speaking. I got a phone call from the Associated Press saying, "Do you have any comments about you being sued?" That's how we found out we've been sued. They put this huge press release out first. It's just, they want to show, I mean, if you dare challenge them, they want everyone else to see what they do to who dares challenge them. This is not about my case. This is about a message to everybody else, like heads on the spike from the earlier professor. That's what this is. This is cybersecurity head-on spikes. And so in the fall of 2013 now, we have shock and awe. They had 40 subpoenas. They went after physicians, vendors, nurses, our techs, my assistant, people that left the IT department 6 years before. They're just saying this huge message, and they're getting nothing. Nothing. And when we interviewed, when we had our first deposition, it was with Bobak, and he said, well, there's 4 IP addresses out there. I just skipped my slides, so hold on, I'm gonna get back. So when we went into court, the FTC says to the judge, so this is now they've sued us, we're actually in court, it's a scheduling conference, which is when you meet just to discuss crime. The judge asks him, have you let people know? And the FTC says, there's nothing out there for a company to look to. So there's nothing to look to know what to do, but they're cold fight busted. And then we deposed Tyversa, and they said they found 4 additional IP addresses. Now this is important, because then the winter goes on, LabMD closes. In the summer, we had, my VP took off, my lawyer, it's a mess. I mean, a lot of things happened where justifiably people got really terrified. Because it was terrifying. I mean, when you work in medicine, you diagnose cancer, and we had everything we had. I mean, we had WebSense, we had firewalls, we never found anything out there. It wasn't out there. They couldn't find a breach, they couldn't find a victim, they would have told us. They'd spent years going after us just because they're so mad. But suddenly, in April 14, I'm having dinner, and the company's been closed for 3 months now. And I get a call from Rick Wallace, who I don't know who he is. He said, and he was nervous and a broken soul. And he was a whistleblower. He worked for Tyversa. He worked directly for Bobak. He's the one that would go into workstations. He told me, I go into workstations, I take files at the order of my boss, and I change the metadata, and I lie to everybody about where they find it. Your stuff has never been outside your workstation. It's never been around anywhere. Oh, and by the way, remember when Barack Obama was first inaugurated and they found his Marine One plans on an Iranian workstation? Does anyone remember that story? It was all over the news. That's a lie. We found that in a consultant's workstation in Virginia. And then Bobak said, change the IP address. So what is Bobak doing? He is creating a fall crisis by making everyone think that peer-to-peer is this huge thing, and he's a solution, and you come to him and he charges you. So he's fanning a false crisis so he can be the profit-making solution. And who's he duping? The House of Representatives, the Federal Trade Commission, NBC. Is this believable? It's unbelievable. I'm like, what the hell's going on? So thank goodness I had known Congress by this point, because that got Darrell Ice's attention. Then they went crazy. And then as I was just supposed to start book tour, what am I doing? I'm in congressional investigations. I can't tell anyone what's going on, which was actually kind of fun. And we bring everyone, we're just uncovering so much stuff that I still can't talk about, but it's awesome. Be a great movie one day. And so you have Tyversa boasting. So this is the scary thing about the Federal Trade Commission or any regulator that doesn't have intellectual training, academic training in what they're trying to manage. This is what you're up against, folks. And this is why people go crazy with regulators. Tyversa is up there saying we have 300 to 1.8 billion searches a day. We monitor 4.5 workstations just in this one study. We download 38 million files. And then the FTC says, we want that. We want every file that has over 100 people in it, consumers in it. And every human being is considered a consumer. Because we are going to go after what company has not got the best cybersecurity practices to protect these consumers. Their opinion is, if you get breached, it's your fault. You are not tight enough in your cybersecurity, and you're going to go down. So how many files do you think Tyversa, with these kind of numbers, turned over to the FTC? No, that's a good one. 86. Now, you think there's something wrong with this? That doesn't matter to them. They were upset with me, they just kept on trucking. And then Tyversa said, well, we don't want to give it to you because our client's going to think that we're awful. And they said, okay, well, why don't you create a false company? So the Federal Trade Commission assists Tyversa by creating a company called the Privacy Institute, and they moved the files from the Privacy Institute. They subpoenaed the Privacy Institute so no one knows it's with Tyversa, and they get the files that way. And that's the almost 100 companies. Remember that in the beginning? Do they verify the evidence? No. Do they take their word for it? Absolutely. Do they know who Rick Wallace is? Not yet. So they're gaslighting again, talking about everything that's going on. And so now we go back to court. Because we are screaming that they've destroyed the company, and that is the one little tiny crack where you can go in and have a court tell the agency to stop. But the court basically says, well, you're already dead, so too late. But these are the comments. And I'm going to, for the sake of time, I'm going to just get to a couple of main ones here. The agency's acting mean-spirited. Do you see how hard it is to get an outside court? Now we're in year, this is 5 years after the first call from Tyversa, over 3 years after the FTC started, and we see are just scratching barely at the federal justice system. Mean-spirited. The FTC is going to the business of monitoring, investigating. They decided they hit within their authority, but there's no amendment to Section 5 to specifically allow that, which means agencies do what they want, regardless of what Congress says, and they apologize later. And to get them to apologize takes years and millions, so there's not that many apologies and there's very few challenges. This is all great if they were effective. You have no information how those documents were obtained. That's correct. So they don't know how they got it. It's a sad count in your agency. You'd wait until months before hearing. You've not taken any effort to interview the people who claim had the underlying documents. That strikes me as unconscionable. I mean, you should have heard the judge. He was just smacking them all over the place. He had people in the FTC going, who are you? At the FTC, stand up. Who are you? It's all drama. He's just beating the heck out of them. You don't know where they came from. Holy cow. No wonder you can't get resolved. You know, this company didn't willy-nilly allow them to be closed. We're investigating, we're regulated every year under HIPAA and CLIA. It's insane. But we're in kangaroo court still, and the judge can't hit kangaroo court. The 11th Circuit rules, after all that temper tantrum, his ruling is, can't intervene yet. Not right to intervene, because Congress says the administrative procedure has to be over. Which I say is, as soon as we're done with your funeral, we'll whip you to the hospital. And the first questions when the court started, the administrative court started now, was where's the money, where's the money, where's the money? Does Tyversa make any money? No, Your Honor. The FTC says no, they don't. And that turned out to be not true. So now we're the trial. Now I'm on trial in May of 2014 in the FTC's trial, and he says, hang on a second, you don't plan to introduce evidence of harm? That's correct. Yet we're still guilty. Does that seem nuts? It's true. Do you plan to introduce evidence of penetration? We're not going to introduce evidence. Then we are fighting to demand what standards they use to haul us in. And the court has to rule on the FTC rules, and the FTC is allowed to make their rules because Congress says they can. And the FTC's rules are that respondent, that's the defendant, may not discover legal standards the FTC has used. And I quote this because who's going to believe me when I say that? I have to give you the courts. It's so unbelievable. And so then we bring in the whistleblower. Now they rested their case. This is beautiful. They had rested their case. They had no idea what was coming at them. We had Richard on the witness list before we knew who he was, because we had the witness list pretty heavily stocked. He comes in, he pleads the fifth. And then they come in, and his lawyer comes in with a note from Congress that Tyversa is under congressional investigation. Now, this is when I start really learning how things really work. Suzanne Saxman-Grimm's lawyer. She was working for Lois Lerner. She moved over to House Oversight. Jay Rockefeller, Democrat, best friend of the Federal Trade Commission. Elijah Cummings. Now, I will tell you, this is the moment this got politicized. Red eye, blue eye. I do not want to get stuck in back and forth Republican-Democrat. But, and I voted for both parties, but the facts are that we had Rick coming into Congress with hard drives and forensic evidence, and because of the animosity between the Republicans and the Democrats would not meet him, would not look at the hard drives. As a matter of fact, no, they would not look at it, they try to smear it. So Suzanne Saxman-Grooms is running the show. She is a master of sitting on stuff and not letting it out. Rockefeller sticks his nose in, sends a letter to the press the day before I'm supposed to testify before Congress, saying, Congress is intervening, they shouldn't be doing any of this. This is, and the press buys it because you got these second, third tier young kids that don't have time to research anything. They're in overdrive. And Elijah Cummings is going along to get along because anything that harms the government's all wonderful and great brand is got to be covered up, which is why my next book's called The Politics of Crime. This shocked the heck out of me. It just shocked me. I couldn't believe it that they would do this. And they threw out the red herrings to the press releases. And they work on they don't look so you won't find. Now what they didn't know was that they did know the judge had stayed the case until Congress could get a shot to do this. And all we wanted to do was get Rick criminal immunity. And we needed criminal immunity from oversight with 2/3 of the vote. That's 4 Democrats. We couldn't even get a vote to come up. But what they didn't know was that the Justice Department was waiting. And if Congress failed by October, the Justice Department's going to step in. This is the difference between how they usually contain everything in the IRS and all this other stuff. We had a back door they didn't know about. And Tyversa is being hauled into Congress by the Oversight Committee, and he's like, I don't know what's going on. And yet, when he goes to the FTC, he's like, oh no, Rick Wallace, he's a terrible guy, drinks like crazy, he's been arrested for domestic abuse, he's terrible. Oh, by the way, we those 4 could be made up, but we found 3 more. It was out there, and so they say close to crime dog, because FTC's in big trouble. If they're really sitting here, they have no choice but to double down, because they relied on a petty thief, a petty cyber thief, to go after 86 companies. So we file Freedom of Information Act information. We find out that the head of the FTC, Edith Ramirez, and Senator Jay Rockefeller have been chatting through their staff members, so it's not direct, about the hearing and how to screw that up. That's why suddenly a senator gets involved in the House of Representatives. That's kind of new and unusual. Gosh, what is such a big deal that they go to such efforts to close all this stuff and they're caught red-handed? So all they do is whistle past the grade guard. Because you remember earlier how we talked about the silence. So we're using silence. And corruption is the use of position of trust for dishonest gain. And then the Justice Department comes in. And there's Rick, the guy that has an alcohol problem getting his FBI award, we found out 2 years before from the head of the FBI. So there's a problem kind of discrediting him. And then the congressional report comes out. And so this is the highlights of what Darrell Issa's report came out. And by the way, this report was finished, and because of, I'll skip over the slow wheels of justice, this didn't happen until May of this year. Rick couldn't testify until May of this year. And so Issa, while still no longer the head of the committee, had held this report till it was done. And because everyone's afraid of, no matter how much, when they smear you in politics, everyone's afraid of you, including Issa. Everyone was holding on it until he testified in a great way. And he did testify in a great way, because he's brilliant. So when you just get out of the emotional and get out of the fear and get into the facts, he is completely credible. So, Tyversa acted unethically and sometimes unlawfully. One, under direction of Bobick, provided intentionally false information to the government. Bobick provided false testimony about fabricated documents to the U.S. government, and that's changing IP addresses. According to the whistleblower, Tyversa fabricated Irene IP address of the Marine One, did so in order to receive press attention for the company, found that Tyversa's statements could not be substantiated, because now someone's actually trying to substantiate them. Isn't that scary? 3 congressional hearings in 7 and 9, all those people, if you watch those hearings, you just shake your head. Like, wow. This is the most horrific story, which I can't go too into, but basically, I can't talk about all the stuff that's gone on that I found out through the whistleblower, but I did not find this out from the whistleblower. I found this out coincidentally that my insurance carrier also defended an AIDS clinic in Chicago. And this guy came in and testified next to me during our hearing. And Tyversa called up the Open Door Clinic in Chicago and said, you know, we've got your patients, we found it peer-to-peer, it's out there, would you like to hire us for $75 an hour, yada, yada, exactly like us. And they said no, because they don't have peer-to-peer software anymore, so no, how could it possibly happen? And so what he did is, there is a lawyer worked with the company, filed a class action lawsuit that eventually settled for a substantial amount of money. The AIDS patients are given to a law firm, and that's the first time they found out their information was out, when lawyers are calling them, informing them, and asking them to participate in a class action lawsuit. So then, the clinic gets all this terrible press, and how low will you go? I thought for sure that would light up the media. I thought for sure that would have the Democrats on oversight going nuts, and that's what flipped me out. It didn't. He flew up, he testified right after me about all this stuff. The Privacy Institute, which we talked about earlier, they knew, because they were in bed with the FTC, they knew about enforcement actions. LifeLock's one of them. And so when you're a CEO, you're trying to figure out how to get the bag off your head, you kiss the butt of those the government likes. So they hired Tyversa, because they thought the government liked Tyversa. And yet there's no evidence for any of this stuff. And the FTC now does this, because that's all they've got. But they have a lot of friends, because this is a culture of fear. Because I'm not the head of AT&T. So I am the ultimate pain in their tail. Now, the screaming silence of this, and we're close to time up here, John. So, not everybody, but what I've learned through this experience, that cronies, academia, privacy experts, media, big law firms, any of those in that world in it for the money, don't want this out, because we have parasitic feeding off of false trauma. So it's fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And people that make a fortune off this, you know, just kind of want to, this is not a one-off. This is law that impacts everybody. And this is, you know, my bigger picture is that this is exactly, that this isn't going to be effective. Let me get back to the order of my slide. So the FTC cybersecurity real agenda is to be the #1 self-appointed regulator. They expand their jurisdiction into medicine, technology, and finance by building a portfolio of consent decrees. So they bully you down, you don't get to court. That turns into common law. They avoid the courts. They nail you, persecution due process, usually corporations rule, because it's a smart thing, sign the check, forget reality, forget truth and justice, move on, make a smart business decision. They play chicken little to Congress and the media. The sky's falling, we're all gonna die, cybersecurity is terrible. The problem with them right now is, how have they helped on anything? Target, 91 million health patients just this year. You know, their incompetence is starting to show in the evidence of their results. So my basic point is, bureaucrats are not going to solve this problem. It's people that are in this room that are going to solve this problem. Like the people that created all of the software. At RSA, we had 165 cybersecurity startups on the floor, 45 from Israel. That's what's going to solve this problem. The government's just going to punish it away in the meantime, so they can keep their jobs. And yet we have to figure out in the meantime what we're supposed to do. And they intentionally don't want it specified, which is inflating the market as we all shoot all over the place. So the key's not the regulators. And so that's really the keys who's in this room, but I just want everyone to understand that this isn't just how the FTC works, this is how the FCC works, the SEC works, and there's a split in the government. The FBI, the NSA, the CIA hate this stuff because they know they need to work within the citizens to get to the bigger picture. And yet, but they're more law enforcement trained. The lawyer-trained crowd, what some people sarcastically say, the people that couldn't cut it and get into the Justice Department, just want to focus on their power. And so you also see right now the fight between DHS, FTC, and FCC for cybersecurity authority. So that's enough for now. I'm here the whole time. The book is being sold half off for $10. And I look forward to talking to you guys later and ask questions later too.
Thank you.